When you're wronged, you pay the perpetrator back. You were hurt after all, so you have every right to see the culprit punished. That equilibrium of justice that might put a stop to your hurting can only be reached through retribution. But what if, in that process of retribution, you end up hurting someone else? Someone who will feel exactly the same way you do and will go search for retribution as well. Retribution that can only be reached if you are to suffer. Logically, we are able to identify such a cycle of revenge as harmful quite easily. However, when we are the one who is wronged, we are overwhelmed with emotion, and it becomes quite hard to remain logical enough to actually stop that cycle. Many stories out there, especially cartoons, feature protagonists that attempt to challenge that cycle, who attempt to reconcile two parties that are locked up in such a cycle, using values such as forgiveness, empathy, and friendship. Few shows out there, however, handle this with such nuance as Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts does. The two parties in a cycle of revenge in this show are humans and mutes, with Kipo as a half-mute, half-human hybrid forming a sort of bridge between them. While the show starts out with mainly mute antagonists, we quickly see that most of them are not actually evil. And on the other hand, we see that not all humans are good, as the series' main antagonist Amelia is actually a human. Kipo is a story of these two entirely different groups of people that have opposed each other for decades, finding a way to come together. But how exactly does the show do that? How does it manage to avoid the pitfalls of being seen as just a naive fairy tale? And what can Kipo tell us about themes like revenge and forgiveness? Well, let's take a closer look in this study in Theme. The show at multiple points brings up the question whether Kipo's dream of humans and mutes living together in peace despite their differences is even achievable.
I think the Alliance was a beautiful dream that the world just isn't ready for.
The secret handshake didn't fix 200 years of malcontent. Shocking.
However, despite all those doubts and the fact that it was a long road to get there, Kipo does in the end achieve that dream. And we'll have a look at what Kipo tells us about the tools she used to make her dream come true. Forgiveness and open-mindedness. To do that, we'll have a look at three pairs of humans and mutes that serve as the foundation that Kipo's dream is built on, and that make us as viewers believe in Kipo's dream as much as she does. Let's get started. Benson and Dave are a rather obvious point to start with. They are, after all, the first true human-mute friendship we see in the show. When they are introduced, we know rather little about their past and how they met, but it is rather obvious that they care about each other a lot, a fact that is made apparent throughout the show. They treat each other as equals, they rarely leave each other's sides, and they can always count on the support of the other person, which can be seen in things like Benson taking care of Dave in his baby and kid forms. However, in the last season, we finally get to know how Benson and Dave actually met, and their circumstances couldn't be more fitting into Kipo's overall themes. Once upon a time, there were two groups, the Fanatics and the Daves. I'm not kidding you. That were at war. Over a fan. No, the fan isn't a metaphor, it was literally a fan. And honestly, that just shows you how ridiculous the things that start these cycles of revenge can be. It might start with a pointless thing that really doesn't matter all that much in the grand scope of things, but over time, the cycle of revenge escalates. In the end, that cycle isn't about the thing that started it anymore. It's about the many atrocities that were committed along the way. The war between the Fanatics and the Daves actually goes on for generations, and ends with both sides only having one survivor respectively. And those two survivors, as you might have guessed, were Benson and Dave, both the last of their kind. When they are both caught in each other's traps, unable to escape without the other's help, they are the first ones to take a step towards forgiveness, and they give each other a chance. That chance develops into a, at first, shaky alliance, then a friendship, and then the deep bond we observe when we first meet the two of them. Benson and Dave's relationship is incredibly important for a multitude of reasons. At the point Dave tells the story in the show, it is used to stop Kipo from sinking the human's ship and therefore destroying any hope of seeing her dream fulfilled on her own. It is used to make Kipo aware that she cannot become a part of the cycle of revenge herself if she wants to see her dream come true. However, I think this isn't all she draws from the story. The fact that the war Benson and Dave were involved in went on for decades also shows that no matter how long this rivalry has been going on, how deep those grudges are, it is still possible to break that cycle of revenge when one side takes the first step and, with an open mind, gives the other side the opportunity to lay down their arms and themselves the opportunity to forgive. And in a way, it's not that hard either. What brings Benson and Dave together isn't some great act of reunion. No, it's simple acts of kindness. And I think that's just what Kipo needed to hear. That her dream, despite the many years of hostility between humans and mutes, as well as between the mutes themselves, is possible to achieve. And that, in order for that dream to come true, the simple acts of kindness she has already used so many times throughout the show are exactly the way to achieve that dream. However, the story of Benson and Dave is only shown to us in flashbacks, and it feels far away and somewhat idealistic. The two of them are already friends at the beginning of the show, so we don't see that development towards friends truly play out. Who's to say that they aren't simply a special case? Is their story truly still applicable for the humans and mutes as a whole? Well, let's continue with our next human and mute pair. Wolf and Mandu are the first human and the first mute respectively that Kipo meets on the surface. Right from the start, the presentation of humans and mutes isn't clear-cut. Mandu is introduced mostly as a very animal-like creature, mostly motivated by finding food, unable to speak, and after a while at least open to Kipo's affection. In clear contrast, Wolf is, at first, presented with the more villainous traits. More violent as she wants to eat Mandu and threatens Kipo, incredibly distrusting and overall just somewhat mean. We quickly learn that there are things to like about Wolf though. She is merely adapted to life on the surface, where it is kill or be killed, and where you have to know your place in the food chain to survive. When she agrees to help Kipo find her burrow, she also agrees to tolerate Mandu, but nothing more than that. Similarly, she also tolerates Dave when he and Benson join the party. When you consider that Wolf supposedly hates mutes, this is somewhat odd. Sure, she is reluctant to accept them, but she doesn't treat them with the spite we would expect from someone that claims to hate all mutes. Well, I think the reason for that is rooted in what we mentioned at the beginning. She knows her place in the food chain. As she has proved in the first episode, Mandu obviously isn't a threat to her, and the same goes for Dave. Well, at least most of the time. 4 of his 5 forms are on a spectrum between not very threatening and entirely harmless after all. She's able to tolerate them because they are not a threat to her. Even if they were to betray her, she'd be fine. However, she doesn't just think about mutes in that way. Benson and Kipo are clearly no threat to her either. Or at least that's what she believes, until she finds out that Kipo is half mute. There are several reasons why Wolf takes it so harshly that Kipo is half mute. The fact that she incorrectly assessed how threatening she might be is just one of them. The main reason, however, is clearly that Kipo, who at this point is already a kind of sister figure for Wolf, has been keeping secrets from her. To Wolf, it feels very much like a betrayal, one very similar to the betrayal by Margot and her old pack. I think at first, Wolf might see this as a confirmation that it's not just mutes she cannot allow herself to trust, but humans as well, because even Kipo was able to hide her betrayal from her. However, with time, I think it has the opposite effect. Kipo is the living proof that distinguishing between humans and mutes is somewhat silly, and if Wolf is able to forgive and then trust Kipo, she should also be able to trust other mutes. Wolf is probably one of the characters that develop most throughout the show. At the beginning of the show, Wolf is deeply scarred by the betrayal she suffered at the hand of her old pack, who were like a family to her, and is ready to make all of mutant kind pay in retribution for that betrayal. Towards the end of the show, Kipo hasn't just managed to change her beliefs enough to make her view mutes in general in a different light, but Wolf is even ready to help Margot, one of the Newton wolves of her old pack, when she asks for help. She actually takes that first step of open-mindedness that would be necessary to break the cycle. And even when Margot ends up betraying her again, she doesn't falter in those newfound beliefs. Her development, however, reaches a critical point when she and Scarlamagne chase Amelia. Greta, one of Amelia's lackeys, draws attention to the fact that despite of all of her development, despite the fact that she allies with Hamufa, Wolf still wears the wolf pelt to hide her human nature.
You know deep down Kipo's whole mutes can be our friends thing is bogus. Mute attack, eat, or mind control us. That's why you hide that you're human.
Greta uses this as an argument that deep down, Wolf knows that an alliance between humans and mutes can never work out. But this revelation has an entirely different effect on Wolf. It's true that her allying with Amufa while still holding on to some of her previous beliefs is somewhat hypocritical. But Wolf doesn't view this as a sign that humans and mutes can't work together. She views it as a sign that she needs to change, that she needs to let go of those old beliefs. And soon afterwards, when Amelia unleashes the cure that was hidden in the fireworks, when all humans and mutes work together to protect the mutes from being cured, Wolf is the one that saves Mandu. Wolf, who once tried to eat Mandu, now is the one that saves her from the cure, beautifully paralleling the beginning of the show and highlighting Wolf's development. So, if someone like Wolf, who hates mutes at the beginning of the show and, through her background, probably also has enough reasons to hold on to that belief, can change towards a more open-minded view of mutes, then perhaps that means that Benson and Dave aren't a special case. That anyone can go through that change and therefore Kipo's dream is achievable. Anyone? That still sounds a little far-fetched, doesn't it? Well, I think our next pair has something to say about that. We've touched on it before, but Kipo herself rather obviously serves as a bridge between humans and mutes. The fact that she is half human and half mute is a fun little thematic touch to reinforce that position. Throughout the show, we see her reason with many mutes that supposedly can't be reasoned with, see her appease and later befriend them. Kipo's open-mindedness and willingness to give everyone a chance could easily be written off as naivete, but the show doesn't take that route. Instead, it presents that open-mindedness as the tool that can be used to break cycles of revenge, even if it might be a rough and painful road to get there. Kipo has the chance to prove that she is, in fact, willing to give absolutely anyone a chance when she is confronted with Skarlemane, the mandrill mute that is able to control other primates with his pheromones, and has been built up to as a villain since the first season. He's supposed to be this manic, cruel, and entirely evil mute who thinks that mutes are entirely superior to humans. And, to an extent, that is true. However, it doesn't take Kipo long to see that there is more to him than that when she's first captured by him. Skarlemane shares his past with the Oak family with her, and thus reveals the root of his hatred for humans. He himself is also caught in a cycle of revenge. He was, in his eyes, abandoned by the Oaks, his foster parents, and replaced with Kipo. There are many scenes in which it seems like Kipo might be getting through to him, like when the two of them played piano together, but nevertheless he still absolutely acts as the villain at the end of Season 2. One of the reasons why Skarlemane works so well is because Kipo doesn't treat its characters as binary objects that are either good or bad. It acknowledges that one can be sympathetic and still be a villain, just like Skarlemane is. Nevertheless, Kipo never loses faith in him. And during the entire finale of Season 2, we as viewers were probably rooting for Kipo to finally get through to him. But she doesn't. It's one of the few times we actually see Kipo fail to try to befriend someone, to make them reconsider their past beliefs and actions. The main reason why Skarlemane's following redemption arc, in my opinion, works so well is because he doesn't go from full villain to hero in a moment, but instead slowly develops towards good. As we mentioned, his sympathetic qualities have already been established beforehand, which makes us understand that the potential for good has always been present in him, so his redemption doesn't come out of nowhere. And furthermore, even at the end of the show, he still retains some of his villainous qualities, like when he and Wolf set out to kill Amelia. That only makes sense, however. After all, it's not that easy to shake toxic habits and beliefs once they've had time to fester. Benson and Dave set the groundwork for Kipo's dream, show that it is possible for friendship to develop between humans and mutes, and remind her that the circle of revenge can be broken with simple acts of kindness. Wolf, on the other hand, shows that it is even possible for those with a scarred past, who have been hurt deeply by the other side and have every right to seek revenge, to develop an open mind and forgive. And lastly, the fact that Scarlamane's redemption was handled with such nuance and care shows that even though it might be a long and hard road with countless setbacks, even those that seem entrenched too deeply in the cycle of revenge can find their way to forgiveness if you keep an open mind and give them the chance to grow. However, we also have to mention the risk of all of that. Kipo also reminds us that keeping your heart open, believing in others to do the right thing and giving them a chance also makes you vulnerable. It exposes you to the risk of being hurt, and the very chance you've given them might be used against you. When Wolf tries to see the good in Margot and helps her, she's betrayed anyway. After being captured and imprisoned, Scarlamane repeatedly abuses chances given to him to revert to his old ways. And when Kipo gives Emilia one last chance, she still uses that opportunity to try to kill her. But despite of all of these dangers, Kipo also reminds us that it is still worth it. That even though there are people that will abuse your goodwill and that do not deserve your forgiveness, keeping an open heart will pay off in the end. Hey, thank you very much for watching this study in theme. Phew, this video has been interesting to make again. It's nice to use these kinds of analyses to kind of finish off stories I liked so I can put them at rest in my head to kind of give myself some closure. I don't know if that made any sense to you at all. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you did, I would very much appreciate it if you could leave some thoughts or feedback in the comments, like the video, or leave a subscription to tell YouTube I have worth as a person, if you want to. You could even share it with a friend who also likes Kipo. Well, enough of the self-promoting. Keep in mind that keeping an open heart will pay off in the end, and stay delusional.